In the freezing rain, a solitary black man happened upon two white little girls trembling and huddled under a torn plastic raincoat by the roadside. Without hesitation, he took off his only coat and wrapped it around them. When the child intake center reported it was full, he quietly signed the emergency foster papers despite struggling to get by in his old wooden house. Years later, those two girls, now grown, stepped onto a stage to honor the man. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hype because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The old Ford pickup groaned through the outskirts of Morgantown, West Virginia. Rain hammered down like cold needles against the windshield. Jake Morrison gripped the steering wheel, his calloused hands aching from a double shift at Henderson's Auto Repair. It was past midnight on a Thursday in late October, and exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. At 37 years old, Jake had grown accustomed to solitude. His weathered face, etched with lines that made him look older, bore the marks of a hard life. Silver streaked through his dark hair prematurely. All he wanted was to reach his small wooden house on Maple Ridge Road, pour himself a glass of whiskey and fall into bed. He turned onto County Route 19, a desolate stretch bordered by overgrown brush and wild grass. The road was empty, as it always was this late. Then came the sound, faint at first, barely audible over the drumming rain. A child's cry. Jake's foot slammed the brake pedal. The truck skidded slightly on the wet pavement before lurching to a stop. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew that sound. It was the sound of pure, desperate fear. He killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, the rain seemed deafening, but cutting through it, sharper now, was the unmistakable wailing of a child. Maybe two children. Jake pushed open the truck door and stepped into the downpour. His canvas work jacket was soaked within seconds. His boots sank into the muddy shoulder as he moved toward the tall grass on the roadside, pushing aside wet branches and weeds. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. Two little girls, no more than 5 or 6 years old, huddled together against the base of an old oak tree. Their blonde hair was plastered to their faces, matted with mud and rain. They wore thin, torn clothes, faded cotton dresses that might have been pink once, now gray with filth. Over them someone had draped a ripped plastic tarp, but it provided almost no protection. Their small feet, clad in worn sneakers with holes in the toes, were blue with cold. The children's eyes, wide, terrified, barely comprehending, locked onto Jake. They didn't run, they didn't speak, they simply stared with the primal fear of young creatures abandoned and alone. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his cell phone. His fingers fumbled with the buttons before he managed to dial 911. Monongalia County Emergency Services, came a tired female voice. Jake forced himself to speak calmly, though his voice shook. "I found two children. They're abandoned on County Route 19 near the old Miller farm. It's pouring rain and they're freezing." There was a pause. Papers shuffled in the background. "Sir, we have a major accident on Interstate 68. Multiple vehicles. We're short-staffed tonight. It might be 45 minutes before we can get an officer out there." 45 minutes. Jake's voice rose despite himself. "These kids are going to die of exposure out here. Sir, I understand, but just send someone. Please." He hung up before he said something he'd regret. Jake stared at the two girls. They clung to each other, their small bodies shaking violently. 45 minutes. In this cold rain, hypothermia could set in much faster than that. But taking them into his truck, driving them somewhere. A single black man with two young white girls, his mind raced through the possibilities, each one ending badly. He'd seen how this town worked. Suspicion first, questions later. And for someone who looked like him, suspicion could turn into something worse very quickly. Jake pulled out his phone again and scrolled through his contacts. There was only one person he trusted in this moment. He pressed the call button. The phone rang 4 times. Then a calm, deep voice answered. "Hello, Reverend Cole, it's Jake Morrison." "Jake?" There was concern in the older man's voice. "What's wrong, son?" "It's past midnight," Jake explained quickly. "The crying, the children, the rain, the delayed police response." His voice cracked with emotion. "I don't know what to do. If I leave them here, they might die. But if I take them, I'm putting myself in danger. You know how people are." Silence stretched on the other end. Jake could hear the Reverend breathing, thinking. Finally the older man spoke, his words measured and kind. "Jake, I've known you for 10 years. You're a good man with a good heart. Do what your conscience tells you is right. The Lord will see you through whatever comes after. But Reverend, God put you on that road tonight for a reason, son. Don't turn away from that." The line went quiet. Jake stood in the rain, water streaming down his face, and looked at the two trembling children. Their eyes hadn't left him. One of them, the slightly taller girl, reached out a tiny hand toward him, then pulled it back, as if afraid he might disappear. Jake pocketed his phone and knelt down in the mud. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "My name is Jake. I'm going to help you, okay? You're safe now." The smaller girl began to cry again, but the taller one wrapped her arms around her sister protectively. Jake's heart broke. These children had been abandoned, left alone in the darkness and rain, and now they didn't know who to trust. "I'm going to pick you both up and put you in my truck where it's warm and dry," Jake continued, speaking slowly. "Then we're going to wait for the police together. Is that okay?" The taller girl nodded slightly. It was enough. Jake gathered them both in his arms. They weighed almost nothing. Their small bodies shook against his chest as he carried them to the truck. He opened the passenger door, settled them on the seat, and turned the heater on full blast. From behind the driver's seat, he pulled out an old fleece blanket, threadbare but clean, and wrapped it around them. For the first time, the crying stopped. Jake sat in the driver's seat, leaving the door open, and waited. The rain drummed on the roof of the truck. The girls huddled together under the blanket, watching him with wide eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't want to frighten them further. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Jake's mind wandered to dark places. What if the police thought he'd taken the children? What if someone driving by saw him and called in a report? What if red and blue lights flashed through the rain? A police cruiser pulled up behind Jake's truck. An officer stepped out, a stocky white man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and a weathered face. Jake recognized him. Officer Tom Brennan. They'd met a few times at community events the Reverend organized. Jake stepped out of the truck slowly, keeping his hands visible. His heart pounded. Brennan approached, his hand resting on his belt near his radio, not his weapon but close enough. "Jake Morrison." Brennan's voice was neutral, professional. "Yes sir, I called it in. Found these two about 30 yards off the road." Jake gestured toward the oak tree. Brennan looked at the children in the truck, then back at Jake. His expression softened slightly. "You did the right thing calling us. How long have they been with you?" "About 35 minutes. Dispatchers said you were tied up with an accident." Brennan nodded and walked over to the truck. He knelt by the open door and spoke gently to the girls. "Hi there, sweethearts. Can you tell me your names?" The taller girl whispered something Jake couldn't hear. Brennan leaned closer. "Mia and Lily," he repeated. "Those are beautiful names. And your sisters?" Both girls nodded. Brennan stood and pulled out his radio. He spoke in low tones, calling for Child Protective Services and reporting the situation. When he finished, he turned back to Jake. "CPS is going to take a while. They're overwhelmed tonight. Multiple cases." Brennan rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "The county's child reception center is at capacity because of the ongoing opioid situation. Every week we're finding more kids like this." Jake's stomach turned. "What happens to them now? Normally we'd take them to emergency foster care, but..." Brennan trailed off, then made a decision. "You got somewhere they can stay tonight. Just temporarily until CPS can do a proper placement in the morning." Jake's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not qualified. I live alone. I understand. But it's either you or they sit in the precinct for hours, then get shuffled to an overcrowded facility where they'll be terrified." Brennan looked at the girls, then back at Jake. "You found them. You kept them safe. And frankly, they seem calmer with you than they would be with strangers right now." Jake's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. "Officer Brennan, with all due respect, look at me and look at them. People in this town, they're going to have questions." Brennan's jaw tightened. He understood what Jake wasn't saying directly. "I'll make sure it's documented properly. You'll sign papers. CPS will be at your place first thing tomorrow morning. This is official and temporary." Jake looked at the two girls again. Lily, the smaller one, had stopped crying. Mia, the older sister, watched him with those enormous blue eyes, waiting to see what he would do. "Okay," Jake heard himself say. "Okay, they can stay with me tonight." The drive to Jake's house was silent except for the rain. Mia and Lily sat close together on the passenger seat, the blanket still wrapped around them. Jake kept glancing over, making sure they were real, that this was actually happening. His house sat on 2 acres of land at the end of Maple Ridge Road. It was small, a 1-story wooden structure with faded white paint and a sagging front porch. The roof needed repairs. The yard needed mowing. But inside it was clean. Jake had always been particular about that. He parked the truck and came around to help the girls down. They followed him silently up the wooden steps and through the front door. The interior was sparse. A worn sofa, a coffee table with water stains, a small kitchen visible through an archway. On the walls hung nothing except a single framed photograph of Jake as a teenager standing next to an older black man, his grandfather, long deceased. "You must be cold," Jake said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. "Let me find you some dry clothes." He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with 2 of his old t-shirts. They would be enormous on the girls, but they were clean and dry. He pointed toward the bathroom. "You can change in there. I'll make something warm to eat." While they changed, Jake heated up a can of chicken soup on the stove. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. When the girls emerged, wearing his oversized shirts like dresses, he ladled the soup into 2 bowls and set them on the kitchen table. Mia and Lily climbed onto the chairs. They ate slowly, mechanically, as if they'd forgotten how to taste food. Jake sat across from them, watching. He wanted to ask questions. Where were their parents? What had happened? How long had they been out there? But he bit his tongue. They'd been through enough. When they finished eating, exhaustion hit the girls visibly. Lily's eyes drooped. Mia tried to stay alert, but kept blinking slowly. "Come on," Jake said gently. "You can sleep in my room, I'll take the couch." He led them down the short hallway to his bedroom. The room was plain, a full-size bed, with a faded blue comforter, a dresser, a lamp. He pulled back the covers and the girls climbed in together, still clinging to each other. Jake stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. "Try to get some rest, you're safe here." Mia looked at him, her small voice barely a whisper. "Are you going to leave?" The question cut through him like a blade. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to be right in the living room. If you need anything, you just call for me, okay?" She nodded. Lily was already asleep. Jake turned off the light and pulled the door halfway closed. He walked back to the living room and sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. What had he just done? Tomorrow Child Protective Services would come. They'd ask questions, his neighbors would see. The whole town would know. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see were those 2 terrified little faces in the rain. He didn't sleep that night. Dawn arrived gray and cold. Jake hadn't moved from the couch. His body ached from the awkward position, but his mind was too wired to notice. He'd spent the night replaying every moment. The crying in the rain, the fear in the girl's eyes, Officer Brennan's face when he suggested Jake take them home. Around 6:30 in the morning, he heard soft footsteps. Mia appeared in the hallway, still wearing his oversized shirt. Her blonde hair stuck up in odd directions. She looked around the living room, with wide, uncertain eyes. "Good morning," Jake said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Mia didn't respond. She just stood there, one hand gripping the doorframe. "Are you hungry?" Jake asked. "I can make breakfast." Still no answer, but after a long moment, Mia took a few tentative steps into the room. She looked at Jake, then at the front door, then back at Jake, as if calculating distances. Jake's heart ached. This child was afraid he might harm her, or worse, abandon her again. "Hey," he said gently, staying seated so he wouldn't seem threatening. "I'm not going anywhere, and nobody's going to hurt you here. I promise." Mia's lower lip trembled. Then without warning, she burst into tears, not loud, panicked crying like the night before, but quiet, broken sobs. She sank to the floor right there in the hallway and cried with her face in her hands. Jake didn't know what to do. He'd never been around children. His own childhood had been lonely and harsh, but instinct took over. He slowly got up from the couch and walked over to Mia. He knelt down a few feet away from her. "It's okay to be scared," he said softly. "It's okay to cry. You've been through something terrible, and you're just a little girl. But I'm going to take care of you and your sister until we figure out what comes next. I promise you that." Mia looked up at him through her tears. Her voice was so small he almost didn't hear it. "Where's my mommy?" Jake's throat tightened. He didn't know how to answer that. He didn't know what had happened to these girls or their parents. "I don't know, sweetheart. But there are people coming today who will help us find out." "Okay." She nodded, wiping her nose on the oversized shirt. At that moment, Lily appeared in the hallway too, rubbing her eyes sleepily. When she saw Mia crying, she immediately ran over and hugged her sister. Jake stood up. "How about I make us some breakfast? Do you girls like oatmeal?" They both nodded. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Jake cooked plain oatmeal and added a little brown sugar, the only sweetener he had. The girls ate slowly, sitting side by side at the small kitchen table. They didn't speak, but Jake noticed something that made his chest tighten with unexpected warmth. Lily, the younger sister, carefully picked up an extra spoon from the counter and placed it next to Jake's bowl of oatmeal. She didn't say anything. She just set it down gently and went back to her seat. It was such a small gesture, but it hit Jake harder than he expected. This little girl, who had every reason to be terrified and withdrawn, was offering him kindness. She was including him. "Thank you, Lily," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's very thoughtful." Lily looked at him shyly and gave the tiniest smile. They'd just finished eating when there was a knock at the door. Jake's stomach dropped. He glanced at the girls, who immediately tensed, their eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Jake said quickly. "It's probably the person from Child Services. The one I told you about. She's here to help." He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on his porch was a woman in her mid-30s with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore black slacks and a gray blazer. Her eyes were kind but tired, with dark circles underneath that spoke of too many late nights and too many cases. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Rachel Torres. I'm with Child Protective Services for Monongalia County." Jake shook her hand. "Please come in." Rachel stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the room, a professional assessment. Jake saw her take note of the worn furniture, the bare walls, the general simplicity of the space. But he also saw her notice that everything was clean, orderly. "Where are the children?" Rachel asked. "Kitchen," Jake said, gesturing. Rachel walked into the kitchen, and her expression softened when she saw Mia and Lily sitting at the table. "Hi there," she said gently, crouching down to their eye level. "My name is Rachel. I'm here to help you and make sure you're safe. Can you tell me your names?" "Mia," the older girl whispered. Lily, the younger one, added. "Those are beautiful names," Rachel said. She looked at Jake. "Mr. Morrison, I need to ask them a few questions. It might be easier if we spoke privately." Jake nodded and stepped out of the kitchen, though he stayed close enough to hear if the girls became distressed. Rachel spoke to them in a low, soothing voice for several minutes. Jake couldn't make out the words, but he heard Mia start to cry softly at one point. After about 10 minutes, Rachel emerged from the kitchen and gestured for Jake to follow her to the living room. She pulled out a notepad. "Mr. Morrison, first let me thank you for keeping the girls safe last night. Officer Brennan briefed me on the situation." "Of course, I couldn't just leave them out there." Rachel nodded. "I need to ask you some questions now. Standard procedure. You live alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Have you ever been married? Any children of your own?" "No to both." "What do you do for work?" "I'm a mechanic at Henderson's Auto Repair in Morgantown. Been there about 8 years." Rachel made notes. "Any criminal record?" Jake had expected this question. "Nothing serious. Got into a fight when I was 8. Spent a night in county lockup. Paid a fine. That's it." Rachel didn't seem concerned. She continued writing. "And last night you called 911 immediately upon finding the children." "Yes, I didn't move them until Officer Brennan arrived and suggested I bring them here temporarily. Good. Rachel looked up from her notepad. Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you what we've learned about Mia and Lily. Her expression grew somber. Their last name is Patterson. Their parents, David and Ann Patterson, died last night in a car accident on Highway 79. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Oh God, preliminary police reports indicate both parents had been using opioids. They were driving erratically and crashed into a guardrail at high speed. Toxicology results are still pending, but the evidence is clear. Rachel's voice remained steady, professional, but Jake could hear the sadness beneath it. The initial investigation suggests that in the moments before the fatal accident, the parents may have realized something was seriously wrong. We believe they stopped and got the children out of the car, possibly intending to leave them at a bus stop or somewhere they thought would be safer. But the accident happened shortly after on the main road, and the girls were left alone on that deserted stretch. Jesus, Jake whispered. Those poor kids. Mia and Lily likely saw and heard parts of what happened. The noise, the chaos, their parents acting strangely. They don't fully understand death at their age, but they know their parents are gone. Rachel closed her notepad. This is all too common in West Virginia right now, Mr. Morrison. The opioid epidemic has created a generation of orphaned children. Our foster care system is completely overwhelmed. Do they have any other family? Jake asked. We're still investigating, but initial searches haven't turned up any immediate relatives. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles that we can locate. The Pattersons were relatively isolated. Jake ran a hand over his face. 2 little girls, orphaned and alone. It was almost too much to process. Rachel looked at him carefully. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you. We have a crisis situation in this county. Our emergency foster placements are full. The Child Reception Center in Clarksburg has no beds available. We have more children entering the system every week because of this epidemic, and we don't have enough qualified foster families to take them. Jake had a sinking feeling he knew where this was going. I'm proposing something unusual, Rachel continued. I'd like you to sign an emergency care agreement to keep Mia and Lily for 7 days while we continue searching for a suitable long-term placement. You'd be a kinship care provider, though obviously not related by blood. It's rare, but given the circumstances and the fact that the girls seem comfortable with you, I think it's the best option. Jake felt the weight of her words settle on him like a physical force. Miss Torres, I appreciate your position, but I'm a single man. I work long hours, I've never raised children, and frankly, he hesitated. You know this town, people are going to talk. A black man with 2 young white girls? I'm already worried about how this looks. Rachel's expression remained sympathetic but firm. I understand your concerns, Mr. Morrison, but right now you're the safest option these children have. If you decline, they'll spend the next week in an overcrowded facility where they'll get minimal individual attention and care. They've already been traumatized. That would make it worse. Jake walked to the window and stared out at his overgrown yard. Behind him, he could hear the soft voices of Mia and Lily in the kitchen. Lily was humming something, a tuneless melody that a child might sing to comfort herself. He thought about his own childhood. Growing up in foster care after his mother died and his father disappeared. The string of temporary homes where he never felt wanted. The night when he was 10 years old and one of his foster families simply dropped him off at a bus station with $20 and told him to figure it out. He'd spent 3 days living on the streets before a truck driver named Samuel Williams found him and took him to a proper shelter. He'd promised himself as a teenager that if he ever had the chance to spare a child that kind of pain he would. Okay, Jake said quietly, still looking out the window. I'll do it. Rachel had Jake sign a stack of papers, temporary care agreements, emergency contact forms, liability waivers. She explained that she would return in 7 days to reassess the situation. In the meantime, she'd be checking in by phone and might make an unannounced visit. Before she left, Rachel crouched down again to speak to Mia and Lily. You girls are going to stay with Mr. Morrison for a little while, okay? He's going to take very good care of you, and I'll come back to check on you soon. Mia looked at Rachel with frightened eyes. Are you taking us away? Not today, sweetheart. You're going to stay right here. After Rachel left, Jake stood in the middle of his living room with two orphaned girls staring at him. He had no idea what to do next, so he said awkwardly, I guess we should figure out some things, like where you'll sleep, and maybe get you some clothes that actually fit. Neither girl responded. Jake scratched his head. Do you want to watch TV? I don't have many channels, but Mia suddenly spoke up, her voice small but clear. Do you have a mommy? The question caught Jake completely off guard. He looked at this little girl, barely 5 or 6 years old, her world shattered, asking him something so simple yet so devastating. No, Jake said quietly. I don't have a mommy. Not anymore. She died a long time ago. Do you have a daddy? Lily asked. No, he left when I was very young. Mia processed this information. So you're alone, like us? Jake's throat tightened. Yeah, sweetheart, I'm alone, just like you. Something shifted in that moment. Mia's eyes met his, and Jake saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. They were all abandoned. They were all survivors. Can we stay here? Mia whispered. Just for a little bit. Jake knelt down so he was at their eye level. Yes, you can stay here as long as you need to. For the first time since he'd found them, both girls seemed to relax just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The phone call came late that same afternoon. Jake was in the kitchen trying to figure out what to feed the girls for dinner when his cell phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Henderson's Auto Repair. Hey Bill, Jake answered, keeping his voice low. Jake. His boss's voice was gruff but not unkind. Bill Henderson was a 62-year-old man who'd owned the repair shop for 30 years. He was fair but expected his mechanics to show up and work. Tom Brennan's wife works in the office at the courthouse. She told him about you taking in those kids. That true? Word traveled fast in small towns. Jake should have expected this. Yeah, it's true. Just temporary. How temporary? 7 days, maybe longer. I don't know yet. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jake could hear the sounds of the shop in the background, the pneumatic wrench, someone yelling about a parts order. Jake, you know I like you. You're a good worker, but I need you here. We've got cars backed up. I know, Bill. I'm sorry, but I can't leave these kids alone right now. They're traumatized. Child Services is overwhelmed. I'm the only option they've got. Another pause. How long you need? At least this week, maybe 2. Bill sighed heavily. 2 weeks I can maybe swing, but after that I need you back or I have to hire someone else. I can't run short-staffed forever. I understand. You doing okay financially? You got savings? Jake thought about his bank account. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck for years, putting aside small amounts when he could. I'll manage. All right, keep me posted. Bill hung up. Jake set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. 2 weeks without pay. He'd been trying to save up to fix the roof before winter. Now that money would have to go toward feeding 2 extra mouths, the utility bills were due in a week. His truck needed new tires. From the living room, he heard Lily's soft voice. Uncle Jake. He walked back into the living room. Both girls sat on the couch, looking small and lost. Yeah, are we in trouble? Mia asked. No honey, you're not in trouble. Why would you think that? Because you look sad. Jake forced a smile. I'm not sad, just thinking about grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. But the truth was, he was worried. Not about the money, exactly. He'd been poor before. He could be poor again. What worried him was what would happen when his neighbors saw these 2 white girls living in his house. When people started asking questions, when suspicion turned into accusation. The next morning, Saturday, Jake knew he needed to take the girls somewhere, get them out of the house, let them be children. But where? Every public space felt dangerous, fraught with the potential for judgment and misunderstanding. Then he remembered the grocery store. They needed food anyway. He could make it quick, in and out. Jake helped the girls into his truck. We're going to the store to get some food, okay? Just stay close to me. The drive to Miller's Grocery on Main Street took 10 minutes. It was a small store, the kind where everyone knew everyone else. Jake usually did his shopping late at night to avoid crowds,
But it was 9 in the morning on a Saturday, and the parking lot was already half full. As they walked through the automatic doors, Jake felt the familiar prickle of awareness. The cashier, a young white woman named Jenny, did a double take. An elderly man by the produce section stopped mid-reach for an apple and stared. A middle-aged woman with a cart full of groceries actually backed away slightly as they passed. Jake kept his eyes straight ahead, one hand on the cart, the other resting gently on Lily's shoulder. Mia walked close to his other side. They made it halfway through their shopping, bread, milk, eggs, some canned soup, when Jake became aware of something that made his blood run cold. A police cruiser was pulling into the parking lot. Through the store's front windows, Jake watched as Sheriff Dale Harris himself stepped out of the vehicle. Harris was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with steel-gray hair and a permanent expression of suspicion. He'd been sheriff of Monongalia County for 12 years. Jake had encountered him exactly once before, during a routine traffic stop 2 years ago. That interaction had been tense and barely civil.
Now Sheriff Harris walked into Miller's grocery with purpose, his eyes scanning the aisles until they landed on Jake. "Mr. Morrison," Harris said loudly, his voice carrying across the store. "Mind if we have a word?" Every head turned. The store went quiet except for the tinny overhead music playing someone's old country song. Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his voice level. "Sure, Sheriff, what can I do for you?" Harris walked over, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. He glanced down at Mia and Lily, then back at Jake. "I received a call. Someone reported seeing you with 2 young girls. Seemed concerned." "I have documentation," Jake said quietly, not wanting to frighten the children more than necessary. He reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out the folded emergency care agreement. "I'm their temporary guardian. Child Protective Services placed them with me." Harris took the paper and read it, his expression unchanged. "Says here it's temporary." "How temporary?" 7 days. Maybe longer depending on what CPS decides." "Uh-huh." Harris handed the paper back. "You got a phone number for this Rachel Torres? I can get it for you." "Do that." Jake pulled out his phone with shaking hands and scrolled through his contacts. He showed Harris Rachel's number. The sheriff copied it into his own phone, then looked at Jake with hard eyes. "You understand why people might be concerned, don't you, Mr. Morrison?" It wasn't really a question. Jake understood exactly what Harris was implying. A black man, 2 white girls. The oldest, ugliest prejudices wrapped up in a thin veneer of civic duty. "I understand that some people see what they want to see," Jake said carefully. "But I'm following the law. These children were abandoned. I found them. CPS asked me to care for them temporarily because the system is overwhelmed. That's all this is." "Right." Harris looked down at Mia and Lily again. Lily had moved behind Jake, peering out from behind his leg. Mia stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. "Girls," Harris said, his tone shifting to something approximating gentleness. "Are you okay? Is this man treating you well?" Neither girl answered. They both just pressed closer to Jake. Harris straightened up. "I'm going to call this number and verify your story, Mr. Morrison. In the meantime, I suggest you be very careful about how this looks. People in this town talk." "I'm aware, I hope so." For everyone's sake, Harris walked out of the store. Through the windows, Jake watched him get back in his cruiser and sit there, presumably making the phone call to Rachel Torres. Jake realized his hands were shaking. He looked down at Mia and Lily. Both girls were pale, trembling. Lily had tears streaming down her face silently. "It's okay," Jake said softly, kneeling down. "Everything's okay. He was just checking to make sure you're safe. That's his job." "Are we in trouble?" Mia whispered. "No, honey, nobody's in trouble." But Jake wasn't sure he believed his own words. They finished shopping in tense silence. Jake paid quickly, avoiding eye contact with Jenny the cashier, and loaded the groceries into his truck. Sheriff Harris's cruiser was gone by the time they left, but Jake felt the weight of eyes watching from inside the store. When they got home, Jake called Rachel Torres immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Morrison, I just got off the phone with Sheriff Harris." "I'm sorry," Jake said quickly. "I didn't. You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." Rachel's voice was firm. "But I want you to understand something. This is probably not the last time something like this will happen. Harris isn't the problem. He's actually being professional by verifying. The problem is the people calling in these reports. What do I do? You keep doing exactly what you're doing. You keep those girls safe and cared for. You document everything. Keep receipts, take photos, write down where you go and when. Build a record that shows you're providing good care. And if anyone gives you trouble, you call me immediately. After they hung up, Jake sat on his couch with his head in his hands. The girls were in the kitchen, quietly coloring with some crayons Mrs. Grace had given them at the church dinner. They didn't understand the full weight of what had just happened, but they understood fear. They understood that people were watching. Jake's phone rang again. This time it was his friend Calvin Reed, who worked with him at Henderson's. "Yo, Jake." Calvin's voice was tense. "You all right, man? How'd you hear already?" "Jenny Miller's cousin works at the shop. Word travels fast. Everyone's talking about you and those kids." Jake rubbed his eyes. "Great. Look, brother, I gotta be real with you." Calvin's tone was serious. "What you're doing is admirable and all that. But you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. You know how this town is. You know how people think. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and you could end up in serious trouble. What do you want me to do, Calvin? Give them back?" "I'm just saying maybe this ain't your fight, man. You're not their father. You don't owe them anything. They have nobody else. They're not your responsibility." Calvin's voice rose with frustration. "You're a single black man in a white town taking care of 2 white girls. Do you understand how that looks? Do you understand what could happen if someone decides to make this ugly? I know the risks. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I've known you for 8 years, Jake. You're a good dude. You got a big heart. But this could destroy your life." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "It already destroyed theirs." Calvin sighed heavily. "I'm trying to look out for you. I know, and I appreciate that, but I can't walk away from them." After they hung up, Jake sat in silence. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Mia and Lily bent over their coloring pages, their small hands gripping crayons. They looked so vulnerable, so fragile. What was he doing? Was Calvin right? Was he putting himself and maybe even the girls in danger by continuing this? But then Lily looked up and saw him watching. She gave him a shy smile and waved her crayon at him. "Uncle Jake, look." She'd drawn a picture, crude and childish but unmistakable. 3 stick figures holding hands, 2 small ones with yellow scribbles for hair, 1 tall one with dark skin. Jake felt something break open in his chest. "That's beautiful, Lily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're a great artist." She beamed at him, and in that moment, Jake knew he couldn't walk away. Not now, maybe not ever. That evening, Jake decided they needed to go somewhere safe, somewhere he had allies. He loaded the girls into his truck and drove to Faith Community Church on 8th Street. Reverend Marcus Cole had been running the church's Wednesday community dinners for years, but tonight was a special Saturday gathering, a potluck for families in the congregation. It was a place where anyone could come for fellowship and a hot meal. Jake pulled his truck into the gravel parking lot. Through the windows of the church basement, he could see people gathering, families, elderly folks, children running around. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables drifted out into the cool evening air. "Come on," Jake said, helping the girls down from the truck. "There's someone I want you to meet." They walked across the parking lot. Mia held Lily's hand tightly. As they descended the concrete steps into the basement, conversations paused. Heads turned. Jake felt the familiar weight of eyes on him, but this time it was different. This time, he had 2 blonde-haired white girls in tow. The whispers started immediately. Jake heard fragments. "Who are they?" "That's Jake Morrison." "Where'd those children come from?" Jake kept walking toward the serving line, trying to ignore the stares. But then a voice cut through the murmur. "Well, good Lord." Jake turned. An older white woman was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. Her name was Diane Fletcher. She lived on the same road as Jake, 3 houses down. They'd never spoken more than a polite hello. "Jake Morrison," she said slowly, her eyes moving from him to the girls and back. "What in the world?" Before Jake could respond, another voice, warm and commanding, rang out across the basement. "Jake, you made it." Reverend Marcus Cole emerged from the kitchen. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his early 60s with close-cropped gray hair and a smile that could light up a room. He wore his usual clothes for community dinners, jeans and a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The Reverend walked straight over to Jake and pulled him into a brief hug, then knelt down to be eye level with Mia and Lily. "And who do we have here?" he asked gently. "This is Mia and Lily," Jake said. "They're staying with me for a while." The Reverend's eyes met Jake's for just a moment, a silent question and understanding passed between them. Then he turned his full attention back to the girls. "Well, Mia and Lily, it is an absolute pleasure to meet you both. Are you hungry?" Both girls nodded shyly. "Then let's get you some dinner." The Reverend stood and gestured toward the serving line. As they walked, he raised his voice so the whole room could hear. "Everyone, I want you to meet Jake's guests, Mia and Lily. They're new to our community, and I expect you all to make them feel welcome." It was a gentle but unmistakable directive. The whispers died down. People nodded and smiled, some genuinely, others more hesitantly. An older woman with silver-gray hair approached as Jake and the girls filled their plates. She had kind eyes and a soft grandmotherly presence. Her name was Helen Porter, but everyone called her Mrs. Grace. "Jake," she said warmly, "it's good to see you. And these precious little ones." She smiled at Mia and Lily. "My goodness, you both look like you could use some warmer clothes. Winter's coming early this year." Mrs. Grace didn't wait for permission. She disappeared for a moment, and returned with 2 sweaters, clearly donated items from the church's clothing ministry. They were clean and soft, one pink and one blue. She knelt down and helped Lily into the pink sweater. "There now," Mrs. Grace said. "That's better, isn't it?" Lily nodded, touching the soft fabric with wonder. Throughout dinner, Jake felt the tension in the room slowly ease. The Reverend made a point of sitting with them, asking the girls gentle questions about their favorite colors and animals. Mrs. Grace brought over an extra helping of mashed potatoes. A few other families smiled and waved, but Jake also felt the lingering stares from some corners of the room. Diane Fletcher watched him with narrowed eyes. A middle-aged man Jake didn't recognize whispered something to his wife, both of them glancing over repeatedly. After dinner, as people began to leave, Reverend Cole pulled Jake aside. "Walk with me," the Reverend said quietly. They stepped outside into the parking lot. The night air was crisp and cold. The Reverend leaned against the brick wall of the church, crossing his arms. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" he asked. Jake explained everything. Finding the girls in the rain, the deaths of their parents, the emergency care agreement with CPS, the incident at the grocery store with Sheriff Harris. The Reverend listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, the older man was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "You know what you're walking into, don't you?" "I know people are going to talk, more than talk, Jake. This is a small town. People here have long memories and short patience for things they don't understand." The Reverend paused. "You're a single black man taking care of 2 white children. That's going to make some folks very uncomfortable." "I know," Jake's voice was tight, "but what was I supposed to do? Leave them in the rain, hand them over to an overcrowded system that doesn't have space for them?" "No," the Reverend said firmly. "You did exactly what you should have done. I'm not questioning that. I'm just making sure you're prepared for what comes next." He put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You're going to need support. You're going to need people vouching for your character. And you're going to need to be more careful than you've ever been in your life." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll do everything I can to help," the Reverend continued. "I'll talk to people. I'll make sure folks in the congregation understand the situation. But you have to be smart about this. Document everything. Keep records. Don't ever be alone with those girls in a situation where someone could misinterpret what they see." Rachel Torres from CPS said the same thing. "Good, because one accusation, Jake, just one, and this whole thing could blow up in your face." They stood in silence for a moment. From inside the church basement, Jake could hear Mia and Lily's voices as Mrs. Grace showed them the children's play area. "Am I doing the right thing?" Jake asked quietly. The Reverend looked at him with steady eyes. You're doing the only thing. Those girls need you. Whether you asked for that responsibility or not, God put it in your path. Now you have to see it through. That night, Jake lay awake on his couch again, staring at the ceiling. From his bedroom, he could hear the soft sounds of the girls sleeping. But then, around 2 in the morning, a scream shattered the silence. Jake bolted upright and rushed to the bedroom. Mia was sitting up in bed, her eyes wild with terror, her small body shaking. Lily was awake too, crying softly. Hey, it's okay, Jake said, flipping on the small lamp by the bed. You're safe, it's just a bad dream. Mia looked at him, but Jake wasn't sure she fully saw him. Her eyes were unfocused, still trapped in whatever nightmare had gripped her. Mia, Jake said gently, kneeling beside the bed. You're okay, you're in my house, nothing's going to hurt you. Mommy, Mia whimpered. Where's Mommy? Jake's heart cracked. He had no answer for that, no words that could make this better. So instead, he reached over to his dresser and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was an old teddy bear, faded brown, one eye missing, stuffing coming out of one arm. It had belonged to his grandfather, the man who'd raised him after his mother died. It was the only thing Jake had left from his childhood. He held it out to Mia. This was my grandfather's. His name was Samuel. When I was scared I used to hold this bear, and pretend my grandfather was right there with me. Mia took the bear tentatively, clutching it to her chest. Do you want me to tell you a story? Jake asked. Both girls nodded. Jake sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the next hour, he told them about his own childhood. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told them about losing his mother, about living in foster homes, about the night he was abandoned at that bus station. But he also told them about the people who'd helped him. His grandfather, Reverend Cole, the truck driver who'd found him, and took him to safety. I know what it feels like to be alone and scared, Jake said softly. I know what it's like when the whole world feels like it's fallen apart, but I also know that sometimes, when everything seems dark, someone shows up, someone helps, and that changes everything. Mia looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. You don't have a mommy either. No, sweetheart, I don't, but you're okay now. Jake smiled sadly. Yeah, I'm okay now. Lily, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. Can we call you Uncle Jake? The question was so simple, so innocent, but it hit Jake like a freight train. These girls were looking for an anchor, a person to hold on to, and somehow, despite everything, they'd chosen him. Yeah, Jake said, his voice thick. You can call me Uncle Jake. Mia snuggled deeper into the blankets, still holding the teddy bear. Will you stay until we fall asleep? I'll stay as long as you need me to. Jake sat there in the dim lamplight, watching as the two girls gradually drifted back to sleep, and for the first time since he'd found them on that rainy roadside, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a temporary arrangement anymore. This was something deeper, something that scared him more than anything else in his life. He was starting to care. The next morning brought new challenges. Jake woke early, his body stiff from another night on the couch. He checked on Mia and Lily, both still asleep, curled together like two small animals seeking warmth, and then began what would become his new morning routine. Coffee, then figuring out breakfast for 3 people instead of 1. Then trying to locate clean clothes for 2 little girls who'd arrived with nothing but the soaked, torn garments they'd been wearing. He was standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at a box of cereal, when his phone rang. Rachel Torres, Mr. Morrison, her voice was professional but warm. Just checking in, how are things going? Fine, Jake said automatically, then more honestly, I mean it's an adjustment, but we're managing. That's good. I wanted to let you know that I've been doing more research on the girl's family situation. Unfortunately, we still haven't located any relatives. The Pattersons were fairly isolated. No extended family we can find. Jake's stomach sank. So what does that mean? It means we'll need to continue the temporary placement for now. I'd like to extend your emergency care agreement to 30 days while we search for a more permanent solution. Rachel paused. Mr. Morrison, I know this is asking a lot of you, but you're doing really well with them.
Mia and Lily need stability right now, and you're providing that. 30 days. Jake thought about Bill Henderson's warning about returning to work. He thought about his dwindling savings. He thought about the eyes of his neighbors and the whispers at church. Okay, he heard himself say. 30 days. Thank you. I'll send over the revised paperwork. And Mr. Morrison, don't hesitate to call if you need anything. We have resources, food assistance, temporary childcare. If you need to work, you don't have to do this alone. After the call ended, Jake stood in his kitchen and felt the weight of what he'd just agreed to settle over him like a heavy blanket. 30 more days of this. 30 more days of trying to be something he had no idea how to be. From the bedroom, he heard Lily's voice. Uncle Jake, coming, he called back. Jake realized he needed to negotiate with Bill Henderson. He couldn't go 30 days without any income. That afternoon, after the girls were settled with coloring books, he called his boss. Bill, it's Jake. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. CPS extended the placement to 30 days. I know you said 2 weeks was pushing it, but is there any way I could do partial shifts? Maybe come in evenings after I can arrange someone to watch the girls. Bill was quiet for a moment. Let me talk to the guys. Maybe we can work something out. Can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do. I appreciate it, Bill. I really do. Jake, what you're doing, it's decent. Don't think I don't see that. We'll figure something out. 2 days later, Bill called back with a plan. Jake could work 3 evening shifts per week, 6 to midnight, if he could find someone to watch Mia and Lily. It wasn't full time, but it would help keep some money coming in. The next hurdle, child care. Jake called Mrs. Grace. Of course I'll watch them, she said without hesitation. Those precious babies need all the help they can get. You just bring them by, before your shift. Jake felt a weight lift. Mrs. Grace, I can't pay you much. Did I ask for payment? Those girls need care, and you need to work. That's all there is to it. The days settled into a new rhythm. Mornings with the girls, afternoons of quiet activities, coloring, simple games, walks around the yard, then 3 evenings a week. Jake would drop Mia and Lily at Mrs. Grace's small house, work his shift at the shop, and pick them up late. The girls seemed to adjust. They were eating better. The haunted look in their eyes was fading, slowly. They laughed sometimes now, shy, tentative laughter, but real. But the scrutiny didn't stop. Diane Fletcher started keeping a log. Jake only found out about it when Mrs. Grace mentioned it one evening. That woman 3 houses down from you, Mrs. Grace said, her voice tight with disapproval. She's been writing down every time she sees you with the girls, every time you leave the house, every time you come back. She told someone at the grocery store she's keeping records in case anything happens. Jake felt cold anger settle in his stomach. She's watching us. Some people have too much time and too little sense, Mrs. Grace said. Don't let her get to you. You're doing right by those children, and that's what matters. But it did get to him. The knowledge that someone was watching, documenting, waiting for him to make a mistake. It added to the pressure that already felt unbearable some days. 2 weeks into the 30-day agreement, Jake was at Henderson's working on a transmission when Calvin approached him. Hey man, got a minute? They stepped outside into the cool night air. Calvin lit a cigarette, offered one to Jake, who declined. I've been thinking, Calvin said, about what I said before, about you giving those kids back. Calvin, let me finish. Calvin took a drag. I was wrong. I've been watching you these past couple weeks. You come in here exhausted, barely keeping your eyes open, but you work harder than anyone. And when you talk about those girls, man, your whole face changes. You care about them, really care. And they obviously care about you. Jake didn't know what to say. What you're doing is hard, Calvin continued. And yeah, some people are gonna judge. But you're giving those kids something they wouldn't have otherwise. That's worth something. That's worth a lot. Thanks, Calvin. I'm saying if you need help, I don't know, someone to fix stuff around your house, or just someone to talk to, I'm here, all right. They went back inside, and Jake felt marginally less alone, but not everyone came around. One afternoon, Jake took the girls to Riverside Park. It was a small playground on the edge of town, near the creek. The girls needed to run and play. They needed to be children. The park was moderately busy, a few families, kids on the swings and slides, parents sitting on benches. As soon as Jake arrived, he felt it, the shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused, people looked. A woman pulled her child closer. Jake helped Mia and Lily out of the truck. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Play." The girls ran toward the swings, and Jake followed at a distance, sitting on a bench near the edge of the playground. He watched as Mia pushed Lily on the swing, both of them laughing. For 10 beautiful minutes, everything was normal. Then a woman approached. She was in her 40s, well dressed in yoga pants and an expensive jacket. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Jake recognized her vaguely. He thought she worked at the bank. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice loud enough for nearby parents to hear. "Are those your children?" Jake kept his voice calm. "I'm their temporary guardian." Temporary guardian. She said it like the words didn't make sense. "Those girls don't look anything like you. They don't have to." The woman's eyes narrowed. "I think I should call someone. This doesn't seem right." Other parents were watching now. Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Stay calm. Don't give them a reason." "Ma'am, I have legal documentation. I don't care what you have." Her voice was rising. "Those girls look scared." Jake glanced over at Mia and Lily. They'd stopped playing, and were watching this confrontation with wide eyes. They did look scared, but not of Jake. They were scared of this woman, and the attention she was drawing. Before Jake could respond, another voice cut in. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" A man in his 30s had walked over. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and he looked at the woman with an expression that was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, but I was just talking to Jake here earlier. Those are his nieces visiting from out of town." It was a lie. Jake had never seen this man before in his life. The woman looked between Jake and the stranger, confused. "His nieces?" "Yeah. Jake's my buddy from church. He told me they'd be visiting." The man extended his hand to Jake. "Good to see you again, Jake." Jake shook his hand, understanding what was happening. "Good to see you too." The woman looked flustered. "Well, I just thought, better to be careful." "I get it," the stranger said smoothly. "But everything's fine here. Have a good day." The woman retreated, glancing back several times. Jake watched her pull out her phone, probably calling someone anyway. The stranger stayed until she left, then turned to Jake. "Sorry about that. Name's Tom. Tom Bradley. I really do go to Faith Community. I've seen you at the dinners." "Thank you," Jake said, still processing what had just happened. "You didn't have to do that."
"Yeah, I did." Tom glanced over at Mia and Lily, who were slowly starting to play again. "Those kids looked terrified of her. Whatever your situation is, I figured you could use a hand." "I appreciate it." Tom started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, people talk at church, Mrs. Grace told a bunch of us about what you're doing, taking in those kids when nobody else would. That's good work, man. Don't let people like her get you down." He left before Jake could respond. Jake sat on the bench, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Mia appeared in front of him, her face worried. "Uncle Jake, are you okay?" He pulled her into a quick hug. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay. Everything's okay." But as they packed up and left the park 15 minutes later, Jake felt the weight of eyes following them all the way to the truck. That night, after the girls were asleep, Jake sat on his porch in the dark. The autumn air was cold. He could hear crickets and the distant sound of a dog barking. His phone rang. "Rachel Torres. Mr. Morrison, I received 3 calls today, all reporting concerns about you and the girls." Jake's stomach dropped. "Rachel, I swear I know. I believe you, but I need you to understand something. The people calling in aren't necessarily bad people. They're scared. They see something they don't understand and they react. But their fear becomes your problem. So what do? You keep being careful. You keep those girls safe, and you start keeping detailed records. Write down everywhere you go, everyone you talk to. Take photos of the girls. Happy photos showing they're well cared for. Build a file that shows you're doing right by them, because if this escalates, you're going to need evidence. After they hung up, Jake pulled out a notebook and started writing. Everything that had happened that day, the park, the woman, Tom Bradley's intervention. He wrote it all down, including the date and time. This was his life now. Every moment documented, every action scrutinized, every kindness weighed against potential suspicion. He looked through the window at his house. The lights were off. The girls were sleeping. For the first time in their short lives they were safe and cared for. That had to count for something. It had to. 3 weeks into the 30-day placement something shifted. It was subtle, nothing Jake could point to exactly, but the girls were changing. Healing maybe. Lily started singing. Not loudly but soft little tunes she'd make up while coloring. Uncle Jake is tall. Uncle Jake has a truck. Uncle Jake makes good soup. Simple lyrics that made Jake's heart ache with their innocence. Mia started asking questions. Real questions, not just fearful ones. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds go in winter? Can we plant flowers in the yard? These were signs of children beginning to feel safe, beginning to believe they could stay. Jake tried not to think about what would happen when the 30 days were up. Rachel hadn't called with news of a permanent family. Part of him was relieved. A bigger part was terrified of what that meant for his future, and theirs. One Saturday morning, Mrs. Grace called. "Jake, I'm making too much chicken stew. Can you and the girls come by for lunch?" Jake knew she hadn't made too much. She'd made it specifically for them. But he'd learned to accept help gracefully. "We'd love to." They drove to Mrs. Grace's small house on Willow Street. It was a cozy place filled with the smell of home cooking and the warmth of someone who'd spent a lifetime caring for others. Mrs. Grace fussed over Mia and Lily, seating them at her kitchen table and serving them generous portions. The girls ate eagerly. They were always hungry these days, their small bodies making up for the trauma and neglect. After lunch, Mrs. Grace pulled Jake aside while the girls played in her backyard. "Jake, I need to tell you something. Diane Fletcher came to see me yesterday." Jake tensed. What did she want? "She wanted me to sign her petition. Said you're unfit to care for those children. Said it's inappropriate and probably illegal." Mrs. Grace's voice was sharp with disapproval. "I told her where she could put her petition." Despite the seriousness, Jake almost smiled. "How many people has she gotten to sign?" 17, last I heard. Out of a neighborhood of over 100 homes. Mrs. Grace shook her head. "Most people told her the same thing I did. Mind your own business. But Jake, you need to know there are folks working against you." "I know, but there are more working for you. Tom Bradley has been talking you up at church. So has Reverend Cole. And I've made it my personal mission to tell every person I meet about what you're doing for those babies." Jake felt emotion rise in his throat. "Mrs. Grace, I don't know how to thank you. You don't thank me. You just keep loving those girls. That's all the thanks anyone needs." The following Wednesday, Reverend Cole called Jake. "Can you come to the church this afternoon? There's someone I want you to meet. Bring the girls." Jake drove to Faith Community Church. Reverend Cole met them at the door and led them to his office, a small room lined with bookshelves and filled with the smell of old paper and wood polish. Sitting in one of the chairs was a woman Jake had never seen before. She was in her late 40s, African American, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a professional pantsuit and had kind but serious eyes. "Jake Morrison, this is Patricia Freeman," Reverend Cole said. "She's a family attorney here in West Virginia. I asked her to come talk to you." Patricia stood and shook Jake's hand firmly. "Reverend Cole has told me about your situation. I wanted to meet you and the girls." Jake felt a flutter of anxiety. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. But there are some things you need to understand about the position you're in." Patricia knelt down to greet Mia and Lily, speaking to them gently before turning back to Jake. "Mr. Morrison, can the girls play in the other room while we talk?" Mrs. Grace, who had apparently been waiting, appeared and took the girls to the church's playroom. Once they were gone, Patricia got straight to the point. "Rachel Torres contacted me. She's concerned about the scrutiny you're under and wanted me to give you some legal advice." Patricia pulled out a folder. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be very direct. You need to start thinking long-term." "What do you mean?" "I mean that CPS isn't going to find a family for these girls. The system is too overwhelmed. If you want to keep them, and Rachel believes you do, you need to start the process for permanent guardianship." Jake's heart hammered. Permanent, yes. It's not adoption, that's a separate, longer process. But permanent guardianship would give you full parental rights and responsibilities until the girls turn 18. It would also make it much harder for people like Sheriff Harris or that neighbor of yours to interfere. But I'm single, I barely make enough money, and people are already suspicious, which is exactly why you need legal protection, Patricia interrupted. Right now you're in limbo. Anyone can question your right to care for those children. But with permanent guardianship you'd have the law on your side. Jake ran a hand over his face. How long would it take? Several months minimum. We'd need to file a petition with the court. There would be home studies, background checks, character references, and yes, there would likely be people who object. But Rachel is prepared to recommend you strongly, and I've already spoken to Judge Martin Whitaker, who handles these cases. He's favorable to kinship care arrangements, especially given the crisis situation. What if I fail? What if they decide I'm not fit? Patricia's expression softened. Mr. Morrison, from everything I've seen and heard, you're doing an excellent job. But I won't lie, this will be scrutinized more heavily because of the circumstances. The racial dynamics, your single status, the fact that you have no biological or legal connection to these children. Every aspect of your life will be examined. So what do? You keep doing what you're doing. You document everything, you build your support network, and you let me handle the legal side. She handed him a business card. Rachel has arranged for my services pro bono through a state program for emergency foster situations. You're not doing this alone, Mr. Morrison. After Patricia left, Jake sat with Reverend Cole in the quiet office. This is getting real, Jake said quietly. It was always real, the Reverend replied. Now it's just becoming official. How do you feel about it? Terrified. Good. That means you understand the weight of it. But Jake, I've watched you with those girls. You're meant to be their father. Not because of biology, but because you showed up when no one else would. That's what family is. That night, after Mia and Lily were asleep, Jake made a decision. He pulled out his notebook and started writing a letter, not to anyone in particular, but to himself. A record of why he was doing this. Asterisk, I found these girls on October 24th. They were cold, scared and alone. I could have driven past. Part of me wanted to, but I stopped. And in stopping, I changed my life and theirs. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I don't know if I'll be a good father, but I know that Mia and Lily need someone who won't leave. Someone who'll stay even when it's hard, even when people judge, even when I'm not sure I can do it. I'm that someone, not because I'm special or qualified, but because I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. That has to be enough. He closed the notebook and looked at the photograph on his wall, himself as a teenager with his grandfather Samuel, the man who'd raised him after everyone else had given up. I'm trying to be like you, Grandpa, Jake whispered to the photo. I hope I'm doing it right. From the bedroom he heard Lily call out softly in her sleep, Uncle Jake. He went to check on her, finding her still asleep, clutching the old teddy bear. Mia had her arm protectively over her sister. Jake adjusted their blanket, kissed each of their foreheads and whispered, I'm here, babies, I'm always here. And in that moment he knew, whatever came next, courts, scrutiny, judgment, he would face it, because these girls were his now. Maybe not legally yet, maybe not in the eyes of people like Diane Fletcher or Sheriff Harris, but in every way that mattered, they were his. On the 28th day of the 30-day placement, Rachel Torres made an unannounced visit. Jake was in the yard with Mia and Lily, raking leaves into piles. The girls then jumped in. When Rachel's car pulled into the driveway, Jake's stomach tightened. Unannounced visits were standard procedure, but they always made him nervous. Miss Torres, he greeted her. Everything okay? Everything's fine, Mr. Morrison. Just doing my follow-up assessment. She smiled at the girls. Hi Mia, hi Lily, having fun? Both girls nodded. Then Lily ran up to Rachel. We're making leaf mountains. I can see that. That looks wonderful. Rachel spent an hour at the house. She talked to the girls separately, asking them questions Jake couldn't hear. She inspected the bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom. She looked through Jake's records, the documentation he'd been keeping religiously. Finally she sat down with Jake at the kitchen table while the girls played outside. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to recommend that we extend this placement indefinitely under fictive kin care. That's a step up from emergency care. It recognizes that while you're not biologically related, you've formed a family bond with these children. Jake exhaled in relief. So they can stay. Yes, but there's more. Rachel pulled out paperwork. Patricia Freeman has filed a petition for permanent guardianship on your behalf. There will be a court hearing in approximately 2 months. I'm going to recommend that the court grant it. 2 months. Judge Whitaker moves quickly in cases like this, especially when the children are settled and doing well. And Jake, can I call you Jake? Of course. Jake, these girls are thriving. I've seen hundreds of placements. I know what trauma looks like, and I know what healing looks like. Mia and Lily are healing. Their nightmares have decreased according to your notes. They're eating well, sleeping better, engaging with you emotionally. That's all because of you. Jake felt his eyes sting. I'm just trying to do right by them. You're doing more than that. You're giving them a future. Rachel stood. The next 2 months won't be easy. There will be more home studies, more questions, probably more people like that neighbor of yours causing trouble. But if you stay the course, those girls will legally be yours. After Rachel left, Jake stood in his kitchen, processing. 2 months. 2 months until a judge would decide if he was fit to be Mia and Lily's guardian. 2 months of scrutiny, evaluation, and doubt. But also 2 months closer to making this permanent, to making them his family, not just in his heart, but in the eyes of the law. That evening Jake took the girls to Henderson's auto repair. Bill had offered to let him bring them by once, so they could see where he worked. The shop was quiet. It was after closing time. Jake showed Mia and Lily around, explaining what different tools were for, letting them sit in the driver's seat of a car he was working on. Calvin was there, finishing up paperwork. He came over, wiping his hands on a rag. So these are the famous girls, Calvin said, smiling. I'm Calvin. I work with your Uncle Jake. Hi, Mia said shyly. You know your Uncle Jake is the best mechanic here, Calvin told them. Whenever we have a really tough problem, we ask him to fix it. Really? Lily's eyes went wide. Really, he's pretty special. On the drive home, Mia asked, Uncle Jake, are we special too? Jake glanced over at her. What do you mean, honey? Calvin said, you're special. Are we special like you? Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face both girls. You listen to me. You are the most special people in the world, not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because you're you, and you're mine. Understand? Both girls nodded, and Lily reached over to hold his hand. I love you girls, Jake said, the words coming easier now than they had at first. I love you so much. We love you too, Uncle Jake, Mia said. It was the first time any of them had said it out loud. The opposition came to a head 3 weeks before the scheduled court hearing. Jake received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer representing concerned citizens of Morgantown. The letter claimed that Jake's guardianship of Mia and Lily was inappropriate and potentially harmful. It cited his race, his single status, and questions about his background as reasons why the court should deny the permanent guardianship petition. Jake sat at his kitchen table, reading and rereading the letter, his hands shaking with anger and fear. He called Patricia Freeman immediately. I was expecting this, Patricia said calmly. It's Diane Fletcher behind it. She convinced a few people to pool money for a lawyer. It's a last-ditch effort to stop the guardianship. Can they? Not if we're prepared, and we are. Jake, this is going to be unpleasant, but we'll get through it. Their argument is weak. It's basically prejudice dressed up in legal language. Judge Whitaker will see through it. What do I need to do? Keep doing what you're doing, and be prepared to testify in court. You'll need to tell your story, why you stopped that night, why you kept them, why you love them. After they hung up, Jake sat in silence. He'd known this was coming. He'd known someone would try to stop this. But seeing it in writing, seeing people question his character, his fitness, his very right to love these children, it hurt more than he'd expected. That night, he told Reverend Cole about the letter. They're scared, the Reverend said. People fear what challenges their worldview. But you know what scares them more than a black man raising white children? A black man doing it well, proving that love matters more than biology or race or anything else. That's what really terrifies them. I just want this to be over. It will be. And when it is, you'll have your daughters legally. Until then, you keep your head up and your faith strong. The final blow came 1 week before the hearing.
Jake was at work when Bill Henderson called him into the office. Sheriff Harris was there. Jake's heart sank. "What's going on, Mr. Morrison?" Harris said formally. "I've received a complaint alleging that you've been inappropriate with the children in your care. I'm required to investigate." "What?" Jake's voice rose. "That's not true." "Who said that?" "I can't disclose that, but I need to interview you and the children separately." "No." Jake's voice was hard. "You want to interview them, you do it with Rachel Torres and my attorney present. I know my rights." Harris's jaw tightened. "Mr. Morrison, Sheriff, I have done everything by the book. Everything. I have documentation of every day, every meal, every activity. I have photos, records, character witnesses. If someone has made a false accusation, I will cooperate with the investigation, but not without legal representation." Bill Henderson spoke up. "Dale, I've known Jake for 8 years. Whatever someone told you, it's a lie." Harris looked between them. Finally, he nodded. "Fair enough. Have your lawyer contact my office to set up the interviews, but this will be part of the guardianship hearing. The judge will want to know about it." After Harris left, Jake sat in Bill's office with his head in his hands. "They're trying to destroy me," he said quietly. "They're trying," Bill agreed, "but they won't succeed. Jake, you've got an army of people ready to testify for you. Me, Calvin, Mrs. Grace, Reverend Cole, Tom Bradley, hell, half the congregation at Faith Community. We're not going to let them take those girls from you." Jake called Patricia Freeman and Rachel Torres. They arranged for the interviews to take place at Rachel's office with both of them present. When the day came, Harris interviewed Mia and Lily gently, asking if Uncle Jake had ever hurt them, scared them, or touched them inappropriately. Both girls looked confused by the questions. "Uncle Jake takes care of us," Mia said simply. "He's nice, he makes us breakfast and reads us stories. He's our dad," Lily added matter-of-factly. Harris's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. When he interviewed Jake, his questions were thorough but fair, and at the end he said something unexpected. "Mr. Morrison, off the record, I think someone's trying to use me to interfere with your guardianship. I don't appreciate being used. For what it's worth, those girls seem happy and healthy. That's what matters." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The night before the hearing, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay on his couch. He'd finally bought a proper bed for the girls and kept the couch for himself, and stared at the ceiling. What if the judge said no? What if despite everything, it wasn't enough? What would happen to Mia and Lily? Would they understand? Would they think he'd abandoned them like everyone else? Around 2 in the morning, he heard soft footsteps. Mia appeared in the living room doorway. "Uncle Jake, can't sleep." "No baby, just thinking. About tomorrow." "Yeah." Mia came over and climbed onto the couch next to him. "Miss Rachel says tomorrow the judge decides if we're really your family." "That's right, but we're already your family," Mia said with the simple logic of a 6-year-old. "The judge is just making it official." Jake pulled her close. "When did you get so wise? You taught me. You said family is people who stay. You stayed, so you're our family." Jake held her until she fell asleep, then carried her back to bed. As he tucked her in next to Lily, he made a silent promise. Tomorrow he would walk into that courtroom and fight for them. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because they were his daughters in every way that mattered. And nothing, not prejudice, not fear, not legal challenges, would take them from him. The Monongalia County Courthouse rose in red brick against the cold Morgantown morning. Jake Morrison parked his old truck, took a deep breath, and helped Mia and Lily out. Their dresses, altered by Mrs. Grace, fit perfectly. Their blonde hair gleamed in the sun. They looked like what they were now, safe, loved children. Jake tugged at the collar of his second-hand suit, the one Patricia Freeman had matched with a new tie. He hated wearing it, but today was too important to care about comfort. Inside, they met Patricia and Rachel Torres, the CPS worker who'd first placed the girls with him. "How you holding up?" Patricia asked.
"Terrified." "Good," she said. "Means you understand what's at stake." Mrs. Grace arrived with Reverend Cole, Calvin Reed, Bill Henderson, and half the Faith Community Church. "Did you think we'd let you do this alone?" Mrs. Grace said, squeezing his arm. At 9 sharp they were called in. Judge Martin Whitaker, silver-haired and steady-eyed, presided. Patricia had warned Jake this was technically a hearing, not a trial, but the opposition, led by attorney Gregory Hatch representing the concerned citizens, would get their say. Rachel testified first. She described finding Jake with the girls, the emergency placement, the 30-day extension, and their transformation since. In your professional opinion, the judge asked, are they thriving in Mr. Morrison's care? Absolutely, Your Honor. When I met them they were traumatized and silent. Now they're bright, happy and secure. Mr. Morrison has done extraordinary work under difficult circumstances. Hatch stood. Isn't it true he has no parental training, no family support? And given the racial difference, Patricia rose. Relevance, I'll allow it, Whitaker said. Rachel's voice stayed calm. Love and stability matter far more than racial matching, sir. Removing them now would cause lasting harm. Next came witnesses, Mrs. Grace on his kindness, Reverend Cole on his integrity, Bill Henderson on his reliability. Each spoke with quiet conviction. Then Patricia called Sheriff Dale Harris. Jake tensed. Sheriff, she began. You've interacted with Mr. Morrison during this case. I have. At first you had concerns. I did. A single man taking in 2 young girls, it didn't sit right. Given the racial dynamics, I assumed something had to be wrong. Jake felt the room chill, but Harris went on. So I watched him, responded to every complaint. You know what I found? Nothing. Every accusation came from prejudice, not fact. Those girls are safe and thriving because of him. Truth is, I was the one with the problem. Patricia asked softly, you support this guardianship? Yes, ma'am, without hesitation. As Harris stepped down, he gave Jake a short nod. Hatch's own witnesses followed, neighbors with vague discomforts rather than facts. The air grew heavy with their pettiness. Finally Judge Whitaker turned to Jake. Mr. Morrison, would you like to speak? Jake rose, hands trembling. The speech Patricia had coached him vanished. He took the oath and sat. Tell me, the judge said gently. Why did you stop that night? Jake swallowed. I didn't plan to. I was exhausted, but I heard them crying and couldn't drive past. I thought, what if someone had passed me when I was that kid? So I stopped. And when Officer Brennan suggested you take them home, I was scared. I knew how it would look, but they had nowhere else. I couldn't put them in a system that might hurt them more. You're a single man with limited income. Why pursue permanent guardianship? Jake looked toward the girls, sitting with Mrs. Grace, watching him with total trust. Because they're mine, he said quietly. Not by blood but by choice. From the moment I found them, we chose each other. They needed a father and I needed a family. The courtroom held its breath. Whitaker leaned back. I've reviewed every report and testimony. There are people in this community who oppose this arrangement out of prejudice. This court does not enforce prejudice. It protects children. He looked toward the girls. Mia, Lily, come up here. They approached holding hands. Do you know why we're here? To make it official that Uncle Jake's our dad, Mia said. And how do you feel about that? Happy, Lily answered. Why? Because he's the best dad, Mia said simply. He keeps his promises. He never leaves. Whitaker smiled. Never leaving that matters, doesn't it? Both girls nodded. All right, he said softly. You can go sit back down. He opened a folder. In 20 years on this bench, I've learned the best families aren't always traditional. They're the ones built on love, commitment, and sacrifice. He read from the decree. This court finds that Mia and Lily Patterson are thriving under the care of Mr. Jake Morrison. Removing them would cause serious harm. The petition for permanent guardianship is hereby granted. Mr. Morrison now holds full parental rights and responsibilities. The judge looked up and smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison, and welcome to fatherhood. Applause filled the courtroom. Jake stood, unsteady, as Mia and Lily ran to him. He dropped to his knees and caught them both, tears running freely down his face. We're really your family now, Mia whispered. We always were, Jake said. Now it's just official. Patricia reached him, eyes bright. You did it. We all did, Jake replied, glancing around the room. Rachel, Mrs. Grace, Reverend Cole, Calvin, Bill, even Sheriff Harris in the back. They had all helped carry him here. That evening Faith Community Church overflowed with laughter and food at a dinner the congregation had quietly planned in hope of this day. Someone had baked a cake decorated with 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 2 small, and the words "Congratulations, Morrison family." Jake sat with the girls as people came by to hug him, some apologizing for ever doubting him, others simply saying thank you. Diane Fletcher and the concerned citizens were nowhere to be seen. He realized only later, and didn't care. As the night went on, Jake found himself standing apart for a moment, watching the celebration. He thought of that rainy night on County Route 19, the sound of crying, the headlights cutting through the dark, the choice that had changed everything. If someone had told him what the months ahead would bring, the fear, the judgment, the sleepless nights, but also the laughter, the love, the family, would he still have stopped? Yes, he thought. 1,000 times yes. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, come cut the cake." Dad. The word still startled him. The judge had said it that morning, but hearing it from her made it real in a way nothing else could. He walked to the table, took the knife from Patricia, and with Mia and Lily's small hands resting over his, sliced the first piece. The room erupted in cheers. Jake looked down at his daughters, his family, built not from blood but from choice, from a single moment of compassion on a rainy road. For the first time in his life, he felt completely whole. Later, when the noise of the day had faded and the girls were asleep in the back seat on the drive home, Jake glanced at them in the mirror and knew that his life had quietly divided into a before and an after. Before, a man alone in a wooden house at the edge of town, working long hours, fixing other people's machines. After, a father. He carried them inside, tucked them into bed, and stood in the doorway for a long time. The house smelled faintly of pine cleaner and motor oil, but to the girls it was safety. To Jake it was suddenly alive. He didn't yet know how to be a parent. He would burn pancakes, forget permission slips, and once ruin a whole load of laundry with grease on his hands. But as he watched the two of them sleep, he thought, this is right, this is what was meant to happen. The years ahead wouldn't be perfect, far from it, but they would be theirs. Jake learned the rhythm of fatherhood, lunchboxes, scraped knees, bedtime stories. He also learned that love meant worrying constantly, about fevers, about money, about the sideways looks from people who couldn't understand what they saw. A black man raising 2 white girls in a town still tangled in quiet prejudice. But the church stood by him. Reverend Cole made sure of that. Mrs. Grace arrived every Sunday with casseroles and second-hand clothes, declaring the girls the prettiest blessings in West Virginia. By the time Mia turned 8, she was reading everything she could find. Lily spent hours drawing at the kitchen table, her crayons worn down to nubs. Jake watched them grow into themselves and marveled at how ordinary life, so long foreign to him, had become something sacred. There were hard days too. When the nightmares came back, Jake sat awake, holding them until the trembling stopped. When they asked about their parents, he told them the truth gently. They loved you. They were sick. But none of it was your fault. It was the only way he knew to heal them, through honesty and constancy. By the time the girls reached middle school, the house no longer looked like the place he'd once bought second-hand. Calvin and Tom helped him rebuild the porch and paint the siding. The church hosted fundraisers when money ran thin. Even Sheriff Harris, now humbled by time and reflection, sometimes stopped by with tools and an awkward smile. People change, Jake thought, if you gave them time and something worth believing in. The girls called him Dad now, and he never corrected them. It happened quietly one morning. Lily, half asleep, whispered, "Bye, Dad," before heading to school. He stood frozen for a moment, coffee cooling in his hands, realizing that the word had already taken root in their hearts long before it reached their lips. The years slipped forward like pages in a book. When Mia turned 13, she asked if she could learn to cook. By 14, she was baking cornbread better than he ever could. Lily, smaller and more sensitive, started painting. Their little house soon filled with color. Jake hung every piece on the walls like art in a gallery. At 15, Mia came home angry after a classmate asked if she was really his daughter. Jake sat her down and told her, "You'll meet people who see difference first, but we know what's real. Family isn't decided by color, it's built by choosing each other over and over." She believed him. She always did. The three of them built a small, steady world. School events, Saturday grocery trips, movie nights on the couch. They fought sometimes, over curfews, over chores, but the fights always ended the same way. Jake knocking gently on their door, the girls pretending to still be mad, then giving in to a hug. He learned to braid hair badly, to explain algebra poorly, to listen more than he spoke. The quiet stoic man who'd once lived alone became someone softer, humbler, but stronger too. And when Rachel Torres came by years later, holding a folder and smiling, she told him his story was being shared in CPS training programs as an example of successful kinship placement. Jake felt embarrassed. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, he thought. But Rachel just said, "You showed up, Jake, that's what extraordinary looks like." When the girls were 16 and 17, they each began to find their own direction. Mia talked about studying social work. Lily wanted to be a nurse. They both wanted to help children. "Children like us," Mia once said. Jake couldn't speak. He simply nodded, his chest full to bursting. Graduation came on a bright June afternoon. The same townspeople who had once whispered now stood and clapped. Reverend Cole gave the benediction. Mrs. Grace, her hair silver, dabbed her eyes. As Mia and Lily crossed the stage, Jake stood and cheered until his throat hurt. He'd imagined that moment so many times, yet nothing prepared him for the pride that surged through him. That evening at the backyard celebration, Mia handed him an envelope. Inside was a small check, money they'd saved from part-time jobs. "For the truck," she said. "You've done enough for us. Let us do something for you." Jake tried to protest, but they wouldn't let him. Lily grinned. "Family takes care of each other, remember?" He hugged them both and whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." College changed everything again. Mia stayed nearby at West Virginia University. Lily went to nursing school in Charleston. The old wooden house grew quiet, but it wasn't the hollow silence Jake had once known. This silence was peaceful. Fulfilled, the echoes of laughter lived in every wall. The girls called every week. They came home for holidays, bringing friends who called him Mr. Morrison until Mia corrected them. Years passed. Jake's beard turned white, his hands stiffened from decades under car hoods. But when he talked about his daughters, his voice carried the same quiet wonder it always had. Mia graduated with her master's in social work. Lily became a pediatric nurse. They built lives full of meaning and light. They married. Mia to David, a gentle teacher. Lily to Marcus, a physical therapist. Jake watched them build what he had built for them, homes anchored in love. 20 years after that rainy October night, Jake sat on his porch again, watching the Appalachian Mountains darken under sunset. He was 57 now, his hair white, his back bent, but his heart unburdened. 2 cars pulled into the drive. Mia's boys, Thomas and Samuel, ran up the steps shouting "Grandpa." Lily followed with her twin girls, Emma and Grace, chattering like sparrows. Jake scooped the children up, laughing. Mia kissed his cheek. "Dad, you didn't have to cook," she said. "I wanted to, my famous spaghetti." "Your only spaghetti," Lily teased. They filled the house with noise and warmth. Photos covered the walls, birthdays, graduations, weddings, baby pictures, a life built from one simple decision to stop a truck. After dinner, Thomas asked for the story. Jake smiled. He'd told it countless times. Still, he began again. "It was raining hard. I heard crying by the road. I stopped the truck, and there you were, your mom and your Aunt Lily, tiny, scared but brave, and then you saved them." Thomas said. Jake shook his head. "We saved each other." The children went quiet, listening. For them it was a fairy tale. For Jake it was everything. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Mia and Lily pulled him aside in the kitchen. "Dad," Mia said, "remember the scholarship fund we started for foster kids?" "Of course." Lily smiled. "It's grown. We want to turn it into a full foundation for kinship caregivers like you." Jake blinked. "A foundation, the Morrison Family Foundation for Kinship Care," Mia said softly, "named after you, after what you taught us, that family is a choice." Jake sat down, overwhelmed. "You want me involved, on the board," Lily said. "We need your heart in it." He nodded slowly. "Yes, absolutely yes." The launch took place at Faith Community Church, 20 years to the day since that night on County Road 19. The basement overflowed with people, former foster children, social workers, neighbors. Reverend Cole, now in his 80s, opened with a prayer. Rachel Torres, retired but still fierce, spoke of compassion and courage. Even Sheriff Harris,
humbled by age, offered a few words on learning to see beyond prejudice. Then Mia and Lily took the stage together. 20 years ago, Mia said, "Our father found us on a roadside. We were cold, scared and sure no one would ever want us. But he wanted us," Lily added, "not because it was easy, but because he chose to." They turned toward him. "Our father doesn't like being called a hero," Mia continued, "but heroes don't get to choose their titles. He taught us that love is action, that family is built not born." They revealed the bronze plaque, the Morrison Family Foundation for Kinship Care, founded in honor of Jake Morrison, who stopped when others would have passed by. The crowd rose to its feet. Jake stood beside his daughters, his eyes wet, his heart impossibly full. That evening, when the celebration ended, Jake sat on the church steps with Reverend Cole, who leaned on his cane and smiled. "You did good, Jake," he said. "Better than good. You built something that'll outlast us all." Jake looked toward the horizon. "I just stopped the truck." The Reverend chuckled. "No, son, you started everything." Back home, the family gathered one last time that night. The children slept in their rooms. The adults talked under the porch light. Marcus showed wedding photos. David told stories about Thomas's school play. Laughter drifted into the cool October air. Jake leaned back in his chair, watching his daughters, grown women now, radiant, strong. He thought of the man he had been, lonely, uncertain, too cautious to hope. That man was gone. In his place sat someone whole. Mia caught his eye. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "Just how lucky I am." Lily smiled softly. "We're the lucky ones." He shook his head. "No, we all are, because we found each other, and we never stopped choosing each other." As the night deepened and the house fell quiet, Jake stood before the wall of photos, 20 years of moments frozen in time. His fingers rested on the oldest one. 3 figures, smiling awkwardly at a church potluck. He whispered to the memory, "Stop, help, stay, love." It had been that simple, and it had been enough. For in choosing love that night, Jake Morrison had built a family and a life that would echo long after he was gone.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.